Good afternoon, everyone. It's Jeff from Bright Squid. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes before we get started with our ransomware review of 2019. So we'll be back on in a couple minutes to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is Jeff from Bright Squid. We're going to get started with our Bright Squid 2019 ransomware review. Just before we dive in, I'm going to talk about quickly just some housekeeping things. If you have any questions throughout, you can type them in the chat or you can type them in the questions section on the right under your GoToWebinar control panel. And then we'll get to those likely at the end. We're going to go about 20-25 minutes here, and we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So with us today is Rohit Joshi, the CEO and co-founder of Bright Squid. Rohit is a lawyer with a long and very, very long background in technology law, in privacy law. Rohit speaks internationally at conferences talking about the regulations, and we've done a lot of research here our own on ransomware, and you'll see some of that in the presentation. What the implications are, and what you can and should be doing to keep ransomware out of your clinic. So we'll get started. If I can get this to go. Quickly, the agenda we have. So we'll talk about what ransomware is. Do kind of a quick definition. We'll look at an example of ransomware. We'll talk about the likelihood of ransomware. What happens after an attack, and then we're going to look at some stats. What are the experts saying? What are the security experts saying in terms of the trends for ransomware? How does ransomware exist? What does it look like in healthcare? Is it an issue? We'll look at how it certainly is, and then we'll look at steps for prevention. As I said, what you can and should be doing to keep ransomware out of your clinic, and obviously we'll know a lot of the why. So, Rohit, I'll turn things over to you. And here we are with What is ransomware?
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. And I think what you'll hear today for everybody who's online is it's more going to be a conversation between Jeff and I. So please feel free to ask questions. We'll try to include them as we're going through most of our discussion. So let's talk about ransomware. And I would say that, we've seen ransomware show up much more over the past 2 or 3 years. And it's interesting if you look at the rise of ransomware and what it is. It basically forces well, first of all, it infiltrates a computer, and we're going to talk about how. But once it infiltrates that computer, its job is to lock up that computer. And what happens after it's locked up is it gives the computer owner a place to deposit money, and it's usually through Bitcoin because it's untraceable. Once that money is paid, there's a pretty good chance that you will get your data back. If you do not pay that money, it's almost impossible to get your data back. So that's where we're going to start talking about the risk to the clinics for locking up their information. We've got some experience from clinics that have come to us after they've been hit by ransomware, and also some clinics that have prevented massive ransomware challenges by using some of our software. But again, ask questions, participate in the discussion, and we will try to do our best in answering those as we go through it. The one last thing about ransomware that's interesting is you can see the rise of ransomware that almost coordinates with the rise of Bitcoin. Because up until, ransomware has been around for a long time, but you could always trace the person who sent it because they would ask to get paid in the bank account. You could always trace the bank account or lock up the bank account. With Bitcoin, what's happened is the person who's issued the ransomware maintains anonymity. And so it allows that transaction to occur for people to get paid without being exposed. And that's it's a modern problem and a modern challenge just based on cryptocurrencies and where that world is. So if we start about, the challenge or the risk of ransomware, there's many, many different ways of looking at the problem. The biggest problem I would say that it presents an issue for the clinics is that the recipient of that information has the potential to actually conduct identity theft. And identity theft is quite different than, losing a credit card. We all know that if you lose a credit card, you can cancel the credit card, and actually the bank's protected. So you're only going to be liable, if anything, for a very small amount if you, in fact, lose your credit card. Identity theft is very different because with the medical record, people have enough information that they gather from that, from stealing it through ransomware. They actually can go and apply for credit cards in the name of your patients. They can apply for mortgages. There's been examples of that in history. They can change addresses. So the first thing that they do is they go to your bank. If they change the address for contact, that becomes now the hacker, and now start applying for loans quite legitimately with the information that they've been able to receive. And different EMRs are, have different amounts of data, but I can tell you all of them have enough data to begin this identity theft for the hacker.
Yeah, just to weigh on that quickly, Rod, I think, we often think about ransomware as this software that locks up all the data, but really the risk there is that you have no idea what's happening in that data behind the wall that they put up. It's likely copied and grabbed because, we'll talk a bit more about this, but the value of patient information is up to, depending on what's included and what they get, somewhere between $30 up to $150 per record is the value. So you multiply out the number of records in your practice and you start to see that, there's a gold mine sitting there.
Yeah, agreed. So just some statistics from the industry. We've got FBI estimates it's a $5 billion global industry. 27 million infected emails in 24 hours with certain ransomware. And I think that the most interesting part about this slide is that, when we say hacker, I can tell you that most people that we speak with have this idea that this is, some movie scene where we've got kids with pizza and beer, or kids with pizza and Coca-Cola, trying to hack in an FBI site. That's when we say hacker, that's the thing that comes to mind. In fact, sort of the modern hacker is a person that is doing this as a business. They get paid a contract wage to establish a ransomware target. They get paid a contract wage to assemble enough of an email that gets through enough of the filters, and then it's sent. And it's sent indiscriminately. It's sent to everybody. Nobody's necessarily sitting behind the computer looking for your clinic to hack into it. It's sent, 27 million infected emails. It means it's an indiscriminate attack. And we'll show some examples of that later. And there will be circumstances where your teams will click on an infected email because they're doing their jobs, or they think they are. And in that process, people trying to do the right thing end up getting caught inside of this ransomware trap. The better the ransomware, the more that contractor gets paid.
Yeah. And I think just, to build on that, they're getting through, like these stats say, they get through updated software. Most of the time when you get an update for your software, it's time to update your Microsoft or whatever else you're using. There's often a security patch in there because there's some vulnerability that's been discovered. And what's great, or not great, what's interesting about ransomware now is you see this bottom stat down here, 50% of incident response. So when your IT people go in and try to remove the ransomware detects that and responds to that attempted intervention.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
one of the most interesting ones that we've come across is ransomware that looks like it's been removed and has mutated. I'll put it that way, and become dormant. And so the typical dormancy period is about 6 months, because within 6 months, what happens is people start to get lax again around what's happening around their practice. Then it reinitiates an attack after 6 months. The best target is the one that's already paid you. So they now can ask again for a secondary ransom based on locking up that computer the first time. So this is a stat which is an interesting one. I'd say that the challenge here, it clearly is trying to stay ahead of the hackers by training staff. And most of the medical clinics that we go into, I will tell you, here's the scenario. Someone has ordered something from Amazon, and that happens on a daily basis. Packages are coming into the clinic for whatever reason. It could be a FedEx, it could be Amazon, it could be any one of a number of courier companies. What happens then is that the front desk staff, trying to do the right thing, wants to make sure it's tracking the package and whatever, clicks on a link. Well, actually, that is the start of the ransomware process. And so I think, there's a great opportunity to train staff on, first of all, detecting ransomware, instructing people how not to click on things. And then if that happens, if there is something that is clicked, we're going to look for antivirus to be up to date so that catches it. And other elements like making sure that all the patches are correct. And we'll go into that a little bit later in the presentation. Part of this is a behavior. We need to train the staff. The other part of it is making sure that you're using the right software and have the right IT company, making sure that all of these things are up to date. Now, here are some costs. We've had quite a bit of experience in the U.S. And in Canada in looking at multiple costs, the way they get laid out in ransomware. The alarming statistic here is $408 per patient record. And, I'll let everybody in the audience, do their own math, start to look at how much is that going to cost my practice? I mean, we know that there's, let's say, 2,000 active patients, but in your database, there's probably another 2,000 to 5,000. That's been our experience. If you do that math, one of the things that holds true is most clinics that have been infected or have had that kind of a breach aren't around about 12 months afterwards, because the costs of that are incurred not by just paying the ransom. The ransom amount that we're seeing is anywhere between $3,500 and $15,000. While that's a tough pill to swallow, it doesn't begin to really itemize the costs as they're coming into the clinic. So reputational harm is one of the biggest ones. We did a webinar maybe 3 years ago or so with a front office person. In that example, it wasn't ransomware, but they were just working in a clinic that got breached. And as a part of the breach protocol, you have to inform every one of the patients that the data is at risk and they have lost control of it. I'll summarize the 1 hour webinar by saying, she could only handle it for about 4 months and then had to leave because the patients were very, very upset and couldn't believe that had happened to that clinic. And no matter how much reassurance, there was quite a bit of reputational harm to that clinic, which again shut down after about 12 months. That clinic was out of business. There's also breach management costs. Breach reporting is a mandatory element in the U.S. and Canada, and there are significant costs in managing all of that. Business interruption is one that we see a challenge with. A lot of clinics believe that they have business interruption insurance. I would encourage everybody on the call to check with their insurance broker whether or not ransomware is included. We've come across multiple scenarios where business interruption will cover fire, flood, and others, other sort of interruption based on that kind of thinking, but absolutely not because of a network failure. That's something that is not covered in business interruption. And then identity theft, the only thing I'll mention about there is what we started to see in the U.S. and now happens quite regularly is a class action lawsuit. If the breach is big enough and it affects multiple clinics, there can be a class action lawsuit that gets launched, which obviously raises the bar from the perspective of the expenses that end up happening. We've now seen the first case of that type of thinking in Canada, where there was a large clinic that lost the patient data through a breach. In fact, it may not have been a ransomware at that point. They just lost that data. And there was a class action lawsuit that's currently in the courts or in process now. So we're starting to see that cost as well. So that's, our experience again, as well as third-party research is showing about $400 per record. So, the question that we get asked a lot is, how likely is one? How likely is it that my clinic will be attacked? Well, we know that they've increased dramatically over the past couple of years, and expecting that in 2019 it's not going to be any different. In fact, they will continue to rise in terms of severity from a ransomware perspective. The stat that's crazy is the organization will fall victim every 14 seconds. It's that pervasive. Again, the phishing emails, they continue to get better. So if I'm sending 27 million ransomware emails, the better I get at making sure that those look exactly like the Amazon email, or exactly like a FedEx email, or exactly like a UPS email, the more exact it looks, the better the chance that someone in the clinic is going to click on it. And so that's, we now are starting to see various iterations of the same ransomware. And we track them to see that the first iteration of it, there might be things that are misspelled, there's characters that are out of place, it looks clearly like it's being written by somebody from another country that's trying to infiltrate systems. Within the third or fourth generation of that, it's nearly indistinguishable. And we'll show you an example of that later on in this webinar. Yeah. Because it's difficult to, how do you train against something that looks identical?
Yeah. And I think the other thing about how likely it is, there's a couple interesting stats that we didn't include because we couldn't get it all in, but you look at you can find maps online of where the attacks are focused, and close to half or a little bit more than half of them are focused in North America, right? Because that's where the money is, that people are more likely to just say, I got to move on with business and get things done, so I'm just going to pay this.
Yeah, and the ransomware is most effective where people will pay.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So, Jeff, why don't you take this one? This was an interesting case that you came across.
Yeah, I think this is starting to become a textbook case in discussing ransomware. I mean, FedEx, a company that, knows better, knew better, it was hit with ransomware and suffered $300 million in losses. Now that's when you go back and look at the cost that we itemize out. The cost of recovering from stuff like that, a lot of it had to do with hardware, a lot of it had to do with business interruption. You look at the case of WannaCry, that example in red that we showed at the beginning, shut down emergency rooms in the National Health Service in Britain, shut down transit systems in Atlanta, Georgia. The cost of not being able to operate, the cost of replacing hardware, all of that stuff that comes out, it was a huge cost, and they should have been protected. There's no excuse for FedEx to not have the proper protections in place. So it happens sort of when you least expect it, but the point is you should be expecting it all the time. So we just want to look at ransomware in healthcare because, that's why we're all here, and it turns out that healthcare is sort of a ripe target for these hackers and has been for a while. And Ro, do you want to talk about these stats? You're
Yeah, I would say that this goes back to the behavior of a front desk staff, which is they're receiving packages all day. They're trying to interact with various other professionals. They're trying to do what I would say is, clearly in the best interest of the clinic. And I think that's why it becomes a target, because there's lots going on, lots of packages being delivered, lots of patients coming to the offices and so on. When we look at that, I think that's one of the reasons that healthcare is so prevalent, or ransomware is so prevalent in healthcare. And it's no surprise that 90% of those organizations saw an increase in the ransomware between 2017 and 2018. And actually, that healthcare devices are also now a target. The most famous cases of hacking are, everything from a pacemaker to X-ray equipment. They can all be hacked and locked up.
Yeah.
And that again is something that is obviously life-threatening. But talk about a good way of getting extorting cash from the vulnerable organization.
Yeah, there's a story of a hospital COO receiving an email from hackers saying, hey, we are in these devices in your hospital and you will pay the ransom or we will start messing with people's lives.
Yeah.
So, when you have that sort of equipment in your clinic or in your practice or in your organization, this is stuff that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, man, this is getting depressing, Jeff. Let's get going.
Yeah. There's happy stories at the end.
So let me tell you. So this is, just a quick slide on actually my home servers. And so, we're clearly interested in the stuff. I've got a very good router, and you can start to see in the many, many, many ways that my home router is being attacked. 3,002 over the past year and a bit. Were how many attacks that came to my home system. And you can see over on the graph that it changes by day. Like you can, I just took this screenshot yesterday, so you can see this week there was a massive threat. where there was some massive number of emails that were blocked by my servers. I only use this really as an illustration of the fact that if it's happening at my house, it's happening everywhere. And, good staff training and IT support and making sure that your clinics are safe is critical. Because if your IT team can't give you this sort of a report, they're probably not the IT team. This is just a quick, an example here where, and this is actually something that's sent to me. I've got an email address that's been not my work email address, but one that gets used quite a bit and somehow or another seems to be capturing a lot of these ransomware. So the first thing, if you look at the anatomy of it, is we look to trusted organizations. Not hard to steal that logo and put together an email. The second is, we've offered they can see an enticing offer, like a refund. There's a familiar feature like a specific reference code. Now, who's going to go back and cross-reference that code? Not 27 million of them. Lots and lots of people like the offer and are ready to click on a link. The last part of this attack is that it's a non-threatening call to action. No one is asking for anybody's credit card. It's actually the opposite. Give us your address, we'll send you money. So I can tell you, there's a lot of people that would go for that, including me, if I wasn't knowledgeable about this. So there's millions of these types of emails, and you can cut and replace Amazon with FedEx or UPS or anybody that's coming to your office regularly that your office probably has some transaction going on with.
And just to kind of build on that, the trick in this case specifically, one of the things to do is just before you click on this link and potentially download something harmful, if you hover over it, it'll show you what the URL is. And in this case, it would not have the word Amazon in it likely. So that, in which case that's how you get the sense, and that's where the training comes in. Look at these things, think, oh, maybe I shouldn't click on that because it doesn't look like it goes where I think it should.
Yeah. All right, now we're getting into some of the solution stuff. We've just got a couple of more slides to stick to our half hour here. The first is, if you haven't had a risk assessment through a privacy impact process, or a privacy impact assessment is what we call them, we would recommend that you get that done. What it does is it has a look at all of the systems that you have running and how you collect, use, and disclose that information. So it comes up with basically a way to operate the clinic with privacy and all of the threats considered. The second is, and this is part of the impact assessment, is you understand what the risks are and how to mitigate those risks or remove those risks. The third element is know the trends, and this is somewhere I think that we can play a part in continuing to make aware the threats that are in the industry. And this is the first webinar, I suspect, of many, where we're going to be talking about here's what's happening in your industry, in your discipline, in your country. So awareness becomes a key element of it. And item number 4, and I've harped on this lots, we need to keep people trained. And keeping you and your staff trained and up to date on those elements is critical. Make sure, number 5, that you have a very good IT team. This is a team that's going to be invaluable in making sure that you continue to upgrade your systems and you're at the best possible chance of never being infected. The last bit of it is make sure you're using a secure communications. And of course, we have a product called Secure Mail. We won't need to talk too much about it, albeit to say it's ransomware proof. And we've got many clinics now that won't communicate with their patients or other healthcare providers outside of Secure Mail because of the threat. What they tend to do is have a separate laptop that's connected to Wi-Fi that's not connected to the normal patient systems, and they operate their email from that. Please contact us if you'd like more information about how that works.
Yeah. So in that sense, the good news is because if you're on this webinar, you have a Secure Mail account. That's why you were invited. So your Secure Mail account does block ransomware, and you can receive as many messages as you need. And then, like as Rohit said, there are clinics that will only receive, because the receiving is the big issue. Receive information on any computer that is connected to your network, where your patient information is, through a system like cybercriminals that does block ransomware, that scrubs for those viruses. And in this case, even you can use it to replace email, fax, mail, anything like that. The other thing they have, we talked a little bit about insurance. There's other options available there for you. So look at your insurance provider, because in the event of a ransomware infection in your clinic, there is a massive recovery cost. And as I said, it's not just the ransom. There's a lot of other different things that have to be dealt with. And for any of these issues, if you want to get trained on cybercriminals, you want to look into it, there's lots of videos, there's lots of knowledge-based resources, how to use it. You can always contact support as well. So the really fun part, before we get to any questions, we have some time. Winners of the draw. So winner number 1, most messages sent, goes to Colleen B. So we'll be in touch and get you your gift card. So congrats on that. So good job sending cybercriminal messages through the clinic. Winner number 2, most invites on the call today is Cindy I. So again, we'll be in touch. And the winner for showing up today is Laura B. So congrats to our winners. Thanks for tuning in. Real quickly, we have a couple of questions, and if anything we don't get to, we'll send a message about them. So real quickly, how are clinics targeted? We talked a little bit about that, but are they targeted specifically? How does it get in?
I think the best answer to that is it's indiscriminate. They're targeting everybody, whether it be my home, whether it be your clinic, whether it be a large healthcare facility. They're targeting everybody and waiting to see what comes back from that harvest. So no, it's not specifically targeted. We just happen to see that healthcare are the most vulnerable.
Yeah, great. And then quickly before we go, yes, this session was recorded, so we'll send this out to everybody who is in attendance, and it will be available online for anybody that wants to watch it as well. So we'll get that out to you. And then we have 30 seconds. How are regulations changing to address ransomware?
So I would say that the regulations themselves aren't changing to address ransomware. What's becoming more clear is that the regulations in Canada and in the US are becoming more and more stringent for breach reporting, for understanding the consequences of being hit by ransomware. And it's, I can tell you, as I've said before, this is something that it is not going away, and the regulations are actually there to help protect more privacy for the patients.
Just last year, right? Alberta put mandatory breach reporting on the Information Act, and Canada as well. We're at our time. Thank you for tuning in. Again, we will send out the recording. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. And if you have any questions, please always get in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.